means? If other means, what other means and when?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Member will know that there is ongoing consultation to look at clarifying the issues that covers both copyright and AI. And there will be a statement, as you know, this afternoon on the data bill, which will cover this issue in more detail. As you will also know, the consultation ends on the 25th of February, after which we'll be reviewing the responses to see what we need to do.
We come to topicals. Patrick Hurley.
Topical number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thursday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to embracing AI, Britain is leading the world. I have just got back from the Paris AI Action Summit. The companies I met there were genuinely excited about our AI Opportunities Action Plan. They were also optimistic about how we're using AI to build a smaller, smarter state. The new government digital service I launched last month will harness the power of technology to deliver efficient, convenient public services designed to work for working people.
Hurley.
In recent months, it's become obvious that some social media companies' algorithms are not being run in the pursuit of a commercial imperative, but rather in the service of the political interests of their host country. Can I ask the Minister if such politicised social media firms can be treated as such with a view to protecting the national interest?
I'm grateful for his question, but I'm also grateful for the leadership that he's shown in his community in Southport during extremely difficult times. The Online Safety Act applies to all people, all users, and that includes measures and in existing legislation to tackle misinformation peddled by foreign states. But he has a very specific challenge with his community. I'm willing to meet with him if he would like, and if he'd like to bring members of his own community to express to me directly the impact these issues have had on him and his community, I would be very willing to take that meeting.
Secretary of State Alan Back.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives secured a £450 million investment from AstraZeneca to expand their Merseyside vaccine factory. When the Chancellor wrecked the deal, AstraZeneca tried to save it by increasing that investment to over £500 million. So why did Labour still walk away, handing jobs and investment to our competitors?
The honourable gentleman says that they secured a deal. Well, the deal was announced in March. The general election was in July. Where was the deal? Where was the funding for it? Where was the written agreement? There was nothing.
Alan Mack.
Mr. Speaker, when Labour negotiates, Britain loses. AstraZeneca are investing over £4 billion in Singapore, the US and Canada. They could have invested in our country too. What is Labour doing now to bring back the deal they destroyed?
There was a deal by WhatsApp that was never followed up by the Treasury, never followed up by ministers, no meetings between AstraZeneca and their government. Their government lets Britain down every time, which is why the country turned to Labour, and Labour is delivering.
Mr. Speaker, the Payment Systems Regulator found that more than half of bank transfer scams recorded in 2023 originated on Facebook, Instagram or WhatsApp. What progress has the Secretary of State made in making sure that tech companies are held to account for fraud originating on their platforms?
He makes a very good point. It's one of the things that we specifically need to look at later when we move forward with the data bill in committee. Perhaps he'll be sitting on the bill committee. Who knows?
David Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has just held talks for a UK-EU defence and security partnership, of which the development of artificial intelligence will have been a key theme. However, last night the UK chose not to join with EU countries in signing the international agreement on AI. So can the Secretary of State please explain this dissonance in the government's approach?
At the Paris summit, let me congratulate firstly President Macron for laying on an incredible summit that brought together governments, tech companies and investors, and Britain's voice was heard loud and clear, which is why we're delivering such extraordinary investment into this country. Most of the aspects that were negotiated, the Labour government signed up to and was fully engaged in. In a few areas, we will put Britain's interest first, and a couple of other countries didn't sign too. I don't hear him criticising them.
Just Athwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Ilford, we worked with Queen Mary. In Ilford, we worked with Queen Mary University to launch a new satellite campus in Ilford to teach medicine and dentistry. Given the growing importance of education in STEM fields, what specific steps is the Secretary of State taking to increase educational opportunities in this area and in London and across the country?
I'm grateful for his question. The government is working to develop a world-leading science and technology skills base that will drive economic growth and opportunity for all. We're committed to expanding the access and participation in science and technology education, and we're partnering with universities to build the skills and workforce across the United Kingdom.
Hurry up, Claus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A month ago, the Prime Minister said that countries will either be AI makers or AI takers. Does the Minister agree that, given that the Prime Minister didn't attend the AI Safety Summit, but he's given a clear indication that the UK will be an AI taker?
This Prime Minister has delivered the AI Opportunities Action Plan. This Prime Minister is deploying AI technology and productivity tools across government itself. This Prime Minister has brought in £30 billion in investment into digital AI infrastructure since he became Prime Minister. And at the same time, this Prime Minister is sorting out the mess left after 14 years of Tory rule.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Imran Hussain.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week we progressed our Borders Bill to deliver counter-terrorism-style powers to bring vile criminal smuggling gangs to justice. We also announced a further £350 million to get Britain building and deliver 1.5 million new homes our country desperately needs, including more affordable homes. We've slashed red tape that holds businesses and working people back, creating 10,000 more apprentices. This morning I have meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was proud to have played my part in helping draft what has now become the Employment Rights Bill. A new poll shows 3/4 of the British public back the stronger rights for workers in the bill, including better sick pay. Yet that lot over there, the Tories and Reform, disgracefully voted against it. In fact, the leader of the opposition doesn't even believe in maternity pay or the living wage. Mr. Speaker, our statutory sick pay is ranked one of the lowest in Europe. It needs to be brought in line with the living wage. So will the Prime Minister back my campaign to strengthen this bill further so sick pay is at the level that finally stops punishing workers for being sick?
Mr. Speaker, our plan for change delivers the biggest upgrade in workers' rights in a generation to our Employment Rights Bill. Ending exploitative zero-hour contracts, ending the scandal of fire and rehire, extending statutory sick pay to 1.3 million employees. Of course, that's on top of the pay rise for 3 million of the lowest paid. I would have thought the Leader of the Opposition might actually sort of support day one protection employment rights, given where she's going, but she thinks maternity leave is excessive. Our plan is pro-worker and pro-growth.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Beno.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government established the Ukraine Family Scheme, and in total, over 200,000 Ukrainians, mostly women, children and the elderly, have found sanctuary in the UK from Putin's war. However, a family of 6 from Gaza have applied to live in Britain using this scheme, and a judge has now ruled in their favour. This is not what the scheme was designed to do. This decision is completely wrong. It cannot be allowed to stand. Is the government planning to appeal on any points of law? And if so, which ones?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I do not agree with the decision. She's right. It's the wrong decision. She hasn't quite done her homework because the decision in question was taken under the last government according to the legal framework from the last government. But, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. It should be Parliament that makes the rules on immigration. It should be the government that makes the policy. That is the principle, and the Home Secretary is already looking at the legal loophole which we need to close in this particular case.
Mr. Speaker, he did not answer the question. If he plans to appeal, then the appeal may be unsuccessful and the law will need to be changed. And if he does not appeal, the law definitely will need to be changed. He talks about a decision made under the last government. It was not made by the last government, it was made by the courts. The issue we are discussing today is about judicial decisions. We cannot be in a situation where we allow enormous numbers of people to exploit our laws in this way. There are millions of people all around the world in terrible situations. We cannot help them all, and we certainly cannot bring them all here. Will he commit to bringing forward that new legislation or amending his borders bill?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already said the Home Secretary has already got a team working on closing this loophole. We don't need to wait for that. We're getting on with that because we're taking control. They lost control of immigration. We had nearly 1 million people come into this country, had an open borders experiment. On a Monday of this week, they voted against increased powers to deal with those that are running the vile trade of people smuggling. Same old Tories, open borders, empty promises.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister was on top of his brief, perhaps he'd be able to answer some questions. Given this crazy decision and so many others, new legislation is needed to clarify the right to a family life in Article 8. I'm not talking about what he just said. I know Labour MPs don't understand much of what they're saying, but the Prime Minister literally wrote a book on the European Convention on Human Rights. This is a situation where we need to put our national interest before the ECHR. Does he agree that we should legislate even if lawyers warn that this might be incompatible with human rights law?
She complains about scripted answers and questions. Her script doesn't allow her to listen to the answer.
Prime Minister.
She asked me if we're going to change the law and close the loophole in question 1. I said yes. She asked me again in question 2, and I said yes. She asked me again in question 3. It's still yes.
Mr. Speaker, he didn't listen to question 1. I asked if he would appeal the decision. He did not answer that. He's not listening. He's too busy defending the international human rights law framework. Mr. Speaker, this case has arisen because a Palestinian came to the UK from Gaza in 2007. He is now a British citizen. This is precisely why we need to break the conveyor belt from arriving in the UK to acquiring indefinite leave to remain and then a British passport and now a right to bring 6 family members here as well. Just last week, the Prime Minister bizarrely claimed that a British passport was not a pull factor for those coming to the UK. Will he now support our plans to toughen the process on indefinite leave to remain and make getting a British passport a privilege, not a right?
Prime Minister.
Speaker, they presided over record high levels of immigration. It reached nearly 1 million. It was a one-nation experiment in open borders. And she was the cheerleader. She was the one campaigning for more people to come and thanking her own side when they supported her campaign. So before she lectures us, I think she needs to reflect on her own record here.
Mr. Speaker, he is the Prime Minister now. The people out there want to know what he is going to do about the situation. He needs to spend less time whining about the last government and do his job. I thought, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister and I both agreed that Israel had a right to defend herself. Yet the judge in this case noted that the family were facing a humanitarian crisis, and I quote, as a consequence of the Israeli government's indiscriminate attempts to eliminate Hamas, and government lawyers accepted this. Is the Prime Minister allowing lawyers to change the position on Israel? And was this because of advice from the Attorney General? And if not, why on earth did government lawyers accept the argument that Israeli actions were indiscriminate?
Prime Minister.
They put the complete opposite argument. She talks about on top of her breath. She has no idea what she's talking about. I'll tell her again. We need to change the law. That's why the Home Secretary is already closing the gap. I know the script doesn't allow any adaptation, but this is getting tedious.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has not read the judgment. I suggest that he does. There are very serious questions now. There are very serious questions now being asked about the Attorney General, the Prime Minister's personal friend and donor. Even Labour ministers are concerned. One Labour peer, Lord Glassman, has called him the absolute archetype of an arrogant progressive fool. Yeah. If we are serious about protecting our borders, we need to make sure we appoint people who believe in our country and everything we stand for. It is not clear the Attorney General does. The government is now recruiting a new Chief Inspector of Borders who lives in Finland and wants to work from home. This is not serious. Why should the British public put up with this?
Prime Minister.
The individual in question was appointed in 2019 by the last government to a senior position. He then worked for 5 years from Finland. We've changed that, and he's now going to be working from the United Kingdom full-time. Finland under them. And she talks about the Attorney General. She sat round the cabinet table with an attorney who was later sacked for breaching national security.
Charlotte Littles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Long-standing traders in the CPS Centre in Colchith were devastated to receive eviction notices, giving them just 28 days to vacate, entirely out of the blue and under spurious pretexts by the new owner, shell company Shivat Hananim Capital. So far, the owner and their legal representatives have failed to hear tenants' concerns and mine and to negotiate a way forward. So does the Prime Minister share my concerns at this situation, and will he set out our plans to protect independent businesses which are at the heart of our high street and communities?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Well, thank her for raising this, which is obviously of real concern to businesses in her constituency. We do, Mr. Speaker, expect landlords to meet their obligations to make buildings safe, and we support robust enforcement action from the regulators if they fail to do so. I will make sure that she gets a meeting with the Minister to discuss what steps can be taken in the particular case to support the businesses that her constituents rely on.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 80 years ago this week, the Allies began a pincer movement against German forces between the Ruhr and the Rhine. British and Canadian troops attacked from the north, Americans from the south. British, Canadian and American soldiers fighting shoulder to defeat fascists. 80 years on, President Trump seems to have forgotten all this. His tariffs against steel and aluminium will hit Canada the hardest and will also hit jobs and the cost of living in our country. So in reminding President Trump who America's true and long-standing friends and allies really are, will the Prime Minister also prepare a plan for tariffs in return, starting with tariffs on American electric cars?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he's right to reference our history in the 80-year anniversary. And of course, we were fighting alongside the Americans, and that is amongst the reasons we have a special relationship. British steel is an essential part of our heartlands, and we will not abandon our skilled workforce. And it needs a level-headed assessment of the implications, which is what we're going through at the moment. But we will always put our national interest first and steelworkers first.
Sir Ed Davey.
Thank the Prime Minister for that reply. But it seems to me the way President Trump and his ally Musk are operating, they do need to hear strong measures and words from even their allies. And moving on to Ukraine, Mr. Speaker, if Ukraine is forced to surrender its own sovereign territory to Russia, it will be the greatest betrayal of a European ally since Poland in 1945. But President Trump says Ukraine may end up Russian, and he wants American money back. I think we all fear where this could end and the dangerous implications for our defence and our security. So can the Prime Minister reassure this House that he and other European leaders have given sufficient support to President Zelensky so that he can't be bullied by Trump and Putin into accepting a deal that will effectively hand victory to Russia?
Prime Minister. As he knows, I met President Zelensky in Kyiv just a few weeks ago at my 8th meeting. The position since the outbreak of this conflict has been a united position across the House of supporting Ukraine, and I was able to reiterate my position, which is we must put Ukraine in the strongest possible position. That matters now just as much as it mattered at the beginning of this conflict, the strongest possible position, and I did discuss with him what more we can do, what more our allies can do to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position.
Kim Ledbeat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, from the benches opposite, I published my Healthy Britain report, recommending a cross-departmental approach to improving health and wellbeing. Now that we're in government, I'm delighted that ministers have hit the ground running, because running is obviously very healthy for you. So will the Prime Minister confirm that last week's announcement of an increase to the public health grants, which will help local services focus more on prevention and early intervention, is just the start of a long-term strategy that will make Britain healthier, happier and more productive, reduce pressure on the NHS and promote growth?
Well, I thank her for highlighting the important role that local communities play in supporting healthy lifestyles. I'm delighted, Mr. Speaker, we're providing almost £4 billion for the local health services that people rely on, and that's things like health visitors, stop smoking services and drug abuse treatments. I'll make sure that she meets the relevant minister to discuss.
Saoirse Eastwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, I get it. Nobody wants to get into a trade war. But, you know, unlike Peter Mandelson, sometimes you've got to stand up for what you believe in. My friends here in the DUP have learnt nothing from their mistake of backing Brexit and think that tariffs are a laughing matter. No. But would you agree with me that actually we need to stand up for ourselves, we need to back our workers, we need to back our businesses, not just in Lagan Valley, but indeed across the UK?
Yeah. Well, yes, of course. The US and the UK share a strong and balanced trading relationship. We invest hugely in each other's economies, and we will continue to work closely with President Trump to boost growth and to create jobs. And I reassure her we will always act in the best interests of businesses and working people across the whole of the United Kingdom, including, of course, Northern Ireland.
Gill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was baffled on Monday that, given the chance to support legislation backed by the National Crime Agency to crack down on criminal smuggler gangs and secure our borders, the parties opposite, the Conservatives and Reform, linked arms in the voting lobby to vote against it. The Conservatives spent 3 years and £700 million on their ludicrous Rwanda scheme and saw 4 volunteers returned. Does the Prime Minister agree with me? There is only one party that is serious about repairing our broken immigration system.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and let me remind them what they voted against earlier this week in our Borders Bill. They voted against, that's Reform and the Tories, they voted against making it an offence to organise the buying, selling and transport of small boats, against making it an offence to endanger lives at sea, against and powers to arrest suspected people smugglers before the smuggling takes place. They voted against. They voted for open borders, both of them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Prime Minister gave yet another threadbare excuse for why he and his North London lawyer friends are giving away the Chagos Islands. Mr. Speaker, this is his decision, and he must own it. More importantly, he can't tell us, the British taxpayer, how much this is going to cost. Is it £9 billion? Is it £18 billion? Is it £52 billion? The Times have called this botched deal insane. Members of his own cabinet reportedly think it's impossible to understand, and one of his own MPs think it's the worst thing the Labour Party have ever done. So can the Prime Minister tell us which word he thinks best describes this deal?
Mr. Speaker, I set out the position in relation to Chagos Islands last week. I also offered the Leader of the Opposition a briefing on this, a high-level briefing. She still hasn't taken me up on that briefing. They're asking questions without wanting to know the facts. It's extraordinary. Mr. Speaker, someone who wants to be Prime Minister does not want to know the facts, even when she's offered a high-level briefing. He'd be better informed if she took me up on the offer of a briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will, I'm sure, want to congratulate Newcastle United on reaching the League Cup final after Arsenal's exit. But will he also, in what is National Apprentice Week, will he also congratulate the 600 apprentices learning trades from welding to quantity surveying as part of the Tyne Bridge restoration programme? And whilst I know he can't confirm bridging the funding gap left by the Tories, will he confirm that he is looking forward to seeing the Tyne Bridge restored in time for its 100th birthday in 2028?
Well, look, I'm going to struggle to sound delighted with the results of that particular football match, but look, it will be a special day for Newcastle fans. But the Tyne Bridge is an iconic north-east landmark, and I congratulate the apprentices who are helping to restore this vital piece of infrastructure. As usual, the Tories made empty promises that they had no intention of keeping, including £2.9 billion worth of transport commitments that were never funded. We will look at the capital projects around the spending review and let her know as soon as we can.
Liz Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents, Peter and Maureen, have been married for 70 years. Peter is 93, and for the past few weeks he has been stuck on a hospital ward, waiting to go home because a care package hasn't been arranged. Peter is missing home and missing Maureen. So will the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that the social care crisis will be tackled this year?
Well, can I thank her for raising this issue and the particular case of her constituents? And I also need to know this is deeply personal to her, and if I may, I extend my deepest sympathies to her and her family for their loss. We have taken immediate action on social care, already delivered £3.7 billion of additional investment, working on the first ever fair pay agreement for the sector, and of course boosting the carers allowance. I invite her and everybody to work with the House on the longer term reform that we need. Thank you.
Julie Mims.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. James Rennie is an outstanding specialist school in the heart of my Carlisle constituency. Having converted every spare corner into classrooms, exceeded its published admissions numbers, and already having 43 applications known for this September, it is literally bursting at the seams. It cannot expand any further, and what is clearly needed is a new specialist school for North Cumbria. What assurances can the Prime Minister give my constituents that his government will put children before ideology and allow local authorities to tackle the shortage in SEND provision?
Well, I thank her for raising this vital issue. It's not the first time it's come up. We are supporting mainstream schools to increase SEND expertise whilst also establishing dedicated SEN units. Because we need to make sure that special schools also can cater for those with the most complex needs. So we're working on this. It's come up time and again, but we are doing that vital initial steps.
Sabine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dorothy House is an amazing hospice that supports terminally ill people in Frumen East Somerset and their families, including my good friend Lisa. Next year, Dorothy House will be looking forward to celebrating 50 years of service, but they will also be facing an additional cost of £422,000 thanks to increases in employers' national insurance. Will the Prime Minister commit to meeting with me and representatives of the hospice sector to hear first-hand the impact of NICs and to work with them to find a solution?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, everyone deserves high quality and compassionate end-of-life care. The honourable member knows we inherited a £22 billion black hole in our public finances. That's why we took the difficult but right decisions to invest in our public services. I do recognise the pressure that hospices are facing, and that's why we invested £100 million into hospitals, with an additional £26 million to support children and young people's hospices. And I will make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
John Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A significant part of the dreadful legacy left by the previous Conservative government is a chronic underfunding of transport infrastructure, especially in the North East, as we've just heard from my honourable friend. So does the Prime Minister agree with me and the North East Mayor Kim McGuinness that redevelopment of the Leamside line, the disused Leamside line, that would reconnect Gateshead with North Durham North, and increasing the capacity on the East Coast Main Line would help bring the metro to Washington in my constituency, and would bring much needed jobs, growth and opportunities to my region?
Well, I thank her, and both she and the North East Mayor are dedicated campaigners on this issue. The party opposite left us a host of unfunded promises, and public transport is in dire condition. Expanding the metro network has huge potential to drive growth and unlock new housing. I'm pleased that progress is being made on the business case.
Second Batty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, we learned that the Prime Minister's close friend, the Attorney General, has in the past advised Caribbean nations on seeking trillions of pounds in reparations. He's been a key player in the surrender of the Chagos Islands and the related fiasco there, which will cost the taxpayers up to £18 billion, and has even advised Jerry Adams, who is standing in line to get compensation from the British government in Northern Ireland legacy payments, the quantum of which could cost up to £2.7 billion. Given the Attorney General's track record, does the Prime Minister have faith in his motives, and does he have confidence that his best friend represents good value for the British taxpayer?
Mr. Speaker, we've long had the principle that everybody's entitled to legal representation in this country. That means that lawyers don't necessarily agree with their client. Now, the Conservative Party used to believe in that principle. If they now disagree with that principle, they should go and see the victims of very serious crime, including sexual crime, and tell them that under their provisions, the lawyer who disagreed with the perpetrator wouldn't be able to represent them, meaning that victims will be cross-examined by perpetrators because lawyers disagree with the perpetrator. That's never been the Conservative Party position. If it is now, they should say so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Allergy School, launched just this week by the Natasha Allergy Research Foundation, is a free programme to support children with food allergies. Allergic disease is a growing issue in this country, with over 20 million people in the UK being affected. For this reason, it has never been more important for us to have a national allergy strategy and an allergy czar to drive and coordinate that action. Will the Prime Minister join me in welcoming this programme, and will he meet with me and the Foundation to talk about how we can work together to drive this issue forward?
Well, I thank you for raising this really important issue, because hospital admissions for allergies have risen sharply, particularly in the last 2 decades. I do welcome the work being carried out by the Natasha Allergy Research Foundation. We will respond to the recommendations of the National Allergy Strategy Group in due course, and I'll make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My Oxfordshire constituency of Didcot and Wantage has seen a 35% population increase in the last 20 years. My constituents recognise the need for affordable housing, but the current planning system isn't delivering the GP surgeries, dentists and transport options that they need. Will the Prime Minister restore faith in the planning system and, as well as focusing on housing numbers, deliver the local targets for health services and wider infrastructure that growing communities need?
Well, thank you for his question. We are, of course, delivering the £1.5 million homes, but we're creating communities as well for the future. And so he's right that that must include good schools, GPs and reliable transport links. That's what makes a good community. And just today, Mr. Speaker, we announced an additional £350 million to deliver more affordable homes so more people can realise the dream of home ownership.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week is National Apprenticeship Week. As co-chair of the APPG for Apprenticeship, I can tell the Prime Minister that employers are very pleased to see the announcements this week that will make a real difference both in terms of the completion rate and the flexibility around apprenticeships. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that schools should be promoting apprenticeship alongside A-levels and other options? And can he tell us what more he's going to do to support more young people to get into an apprenticeship?
I'm very pleased that he's raised this issue and that we'll be able to give employers more flexibility over maths and English requirements. This is really important, Mr. Speaker. There are very many young people who didn't get the maths qualification they wanted at the time, but are very well suited for the future, want to play their part, and now they can get apprenticeships under the changes that we've made. And that's 10,000 extra apprenticeships. This is delivering for them, giving them a chance for the future to contributing, of course, to our economy.
Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Farming Minister told a conference of farmers that farming is not high in the pecking order for this government. Given the heartless family farm tax, is his minister correct? Yes or no?
Farming's top of the agenda as far as I'm concerned. That's why we put £5 billion to support farmers in the budget. They failed to spend £300 million on their watch on farming, and we set out our roadmap, which has been welcomed by the NFU, as she very well knows. It was described as long overdue. I wonder who didn't do it before.
Mr. Jewist, I'm sure you don't want to be leaving today. It's not the best day. Right. Natasha Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a graduate of the Croydon Youth Philharmonic Orchestra, the Prime Minister will know that youth services can broaden a young person's horizons beyond what they could ever imagine. But with national spending on youth services seeing a 73% decline since 2010, can the Prime Minister outline how this government will bring youth services back into our communities? Will he look at giving them the statutory protections they deserve? And will he visit Croydon East to see firsthand the vital role these services play in my constituency?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my days in the Croydon Youth Philharmonic Orchestra were a long time ago now. But we do fully recognise the importance of youth services to help young people save lives and live safe and healthy lives. We've been developing our plans for the new National Youth Strategy to bring power back to young people and help every young person realise their potential.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Every 22 minutes, a child in this country loses a parent or a loved one. That's 40,000 children every year facing a trauma which many of us here know can last a lifetime. Charities such as Winston's Wish do a fantastic job of providing support for young people, particularly when schools are closed or there's no one else to turn to. But at the moment, there's no simple way of the children knowing where the charities are or the charities being able to contact the children. So will the government back my private member's bill this summer to do just that? And would the Prime Minister meet me to discuss how we make sure that another generation of children does not have to face this trauma?
Well, can I thank her for her ongoing work and campaign on this important issue. The Cross-Government Bereavement Group continues to look at how we can improve access to the support that children and young people need at these difficult times. And of course, I'll make sure that she gets the meeting that she wants with the Minister to discuss this further.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday marks the 20th anniversary of the launch of the Make Poverty History campaign, and a fantastic speech for all of us that were there, delivered by the late, great Mandiba. That campaign inspired a generation of campaigners and a great Labour government to deliver unprecedented action to tackle global poverty, lifting millions out of poverty. Will the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to some of those campaigners and commit to doing all he can to ensure that Britain is playing its full part in helping eradicate global poverty today?
It's a really important issue. We do pay tribute, and of course we continue to play our full part.
Alex Bloor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Basingstoke Hospital, used by half of my constituency of North East Hampshire, has had its rebuild delayed by 15 years, despite no ministerial visit to see the worsening conditions there. The cost of maintaining the hospital for those 15 years is estimated to be almost as much as the rebuild itself. So can the Prime Minister explain the logic of making taxpayers pay twice?
Mr. Speaker, her constituents are right to be frustrated about the empty, unfunded promises that were left behind by the Conservatives, a point made by her and, of course, by the Labour MP for Basingstoke. Under the previous government's plan, a new hospital in Basingstoke would simply not have been delivered because it was unfunded. It was a promise without anything behind it. We've put in place a funded deliverable plan which will see the hospital built, and we'll work closely with the Trust to ensure that it is.
Dr Becky Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's devolution plans are a welcome progressive development to shift power and resources from Whitehall to our communities. But there are, of course, discussions now around the process and realisation of benefits for our communities. So can the Prime Minister assure my residents in Worthing West, and indeed all constituencies starting priority devolution programmes, that Sussex devolution will give us meaningful control over our local priorities, including housing, transport and social care?
Minister. Well, I thank her for raising devolution, which will see her constituents in Sussex get meaningful control over local priorities. The devolution priority programme, Mr. Speaker, will see a wave of mayors elected next year, including in Sussex, and I believe that those with skin in the game make the best decisions about their communities.
Final question, Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be well aware of the global vaccination fund, Gavi, one of the United Kingdom's great success stories. It's vaccinated from deadly diseases over 1 billion children under 5. It presents real value for money to British taxpayers, and over 80% of our constituents support it. Will he give the House today an undertaking that Britain will continue this leadership and make a decisive pledge at next month's replenishment conference?
Well, I'm grateful that this is a really important issue. As he rightly points out, I've long supported it and will continue to support and share details with him just as soon as I can. But it is important, have supported it, will continue to do so. Thank you.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's questions. Can people leave the chamber quickly and quietly? We're now coming to the urgent question. Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero if he will make a statement on the potential security implications of the involvement of Chinese companies, including Mingyang, in energy infrastructure projects.
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for bringing this question to the House. The protection and security of the energy sector is an absolute priority for this government. We have a range of effective measures in place which give the government powers to balance an open investment environment to facilitate growth with protecting the areas of our economy that are most sensitive to national security. The government firmly believes that the biggest risk to our energy system and our energy security is remaining dependent on international fossil fuel markets controlled by petrostates and dictators. And that's why we have a mission to make Britain a clean energy superpower to end that dependence. We have a world-leading offshore wind industry here in the UK, and international investment plays a crucial role in supporting jobs across the country. And as part of this mission, my department engaged in discussions with a wide range of investors, including those from other countries. We're also clear that alongside this, growth of UK supply chains is absolutely critical, and that's why we've set out plans for a clean industry bonus to drive investment in manufacturing, as well as setting up GB Energy and the National Wealth Fund. The government will not hesitate to use our powers to protect national security whenever we identify concerns, and the government will take a consistent long-term and strategic approach to managing the UK's relations with China, rooted in UK and global interests. The government will cooperate with China where it can, compete where it needs to, and challenge where it must.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for granting this urgent question, and I thank the Minister for her comments and general reassurances, but there are specific concerns at the moment. China can produce what is useful for us for the development of renewables, particularly in the North Sea, and we can benefit from these investments. China also needs access to our markets. But there are security issues involving companies involved in offshore renewable developments, which have become apparent in recent weeks and been raised numerous times. It has been reported that the Chinese company Mingyang is interested in producing turbines for a new project in the North Sea. And there's already around 60 million of Scottish Government funding, which has been earmarked for a wind turbine factory near Inverness, in addition to a potential 27 million for Orient Cable to provide subsea cables for island communities. This is despite antitrust cases against China from the European Union and the fact that the Norwegian government blocked Mingyang from its green infrastructure projects. So can the Minister reassure the House that the Department will be following the same rigorous processes to assess these risks as the previous government did, which ultimately blocked Huawei from the 5G network? And this must include an assessment of any opportunities for remote access to the turbines, as the software will normally remain in control of the manufacturers even once commissioned, which would leave them vulnerable to being switched off. We need local control. And will the Department reassure the House that there are discussions ongoing with the Scottish Government to ensure that no public money is invested before this risk assessment has taken place? And how will they work with the Scottish Government and Cabinet colleagues to ensure offshore and undersea infrastructure is safe?
Thank you. The honourable member raises some really important concerns, and they're concerns that we're very much alive to. As I said in my first answer, energy security is absolutely critical to the work of DESNZ, and that's why we have the Clean Power Mission, to end our dependency on fossil fuels. International investment is a crucial part of that and helps to support growth and jobs across the country. And as part of that, we have discussions with a wide range, variety of international investors. But we do absolutely recognise this needs to be balanced against national security implications. And that is something that we work on constantly across government with input from a number of departments. And I'm pleased to see my honourable friend, the Minister for Security from the Home Office, here today for this UQ. The government has to consider both those aspects together, the need for investment, the need for greater capacity in our supply chains, but also that security risk. And while I can't get into details of the individual case, given the nature of the discussions that are ongoing, I would reassure the honourable member that we are taking these factors into account. We do want to make sure that the most robust processes are followed as we look at the details of this particular incident.
Chair of the Select Committee, Bill Esterson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I say how pleased I am to hear the Minister confirming the importance of our energy security in contrast to what we saw under the previous government. And they can groan all they want, but that is the reality of what was inherited in July last year. But as we extend energy infrastructure in this country, can she confirm how this government will ensure that we have control of the operation of that infrastructure? And does she also agree that it is vitally important that through the industrial strategy we see the renaissance in our manufacturing and greater resilience in our supply chain, all of which adds to the energy security of this country?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. He's absolutely right that as part of getting this investment into infrastructure, dealing with capacity issues in our supply chain is absolutely crucial. It's one of the reasons why through the National Wealth Fund we invested in lithium in Cornwall last week. So in terms of a critical minerals strategy, we want to maximise the natural resources that we've got where we can. As I said, we want to make absolutely sure that security concerns are addressed as well when we look at which investors do invest in our new economy.
Shadow Secretary of State Andrew Buck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the indication that Mingyang will get the green light from the Treasury to supply wind turbine technology to the Greenvolt wind farm in the North Sea is concerning. Indeed, alarm bells have been sounded by officials in the Minister's own department and indeed in the Ministry of Defence. This green revolution will come with a Made in China label. The government, in collusion indeed with the SNP in Holyrood, are determined to see Chinese companies reap the economic reward. Her party says again and again that transition to renewable energy will reduce our reliance on hostile regimes. Chinese-controlled technology embedded in our critical energy infrastructure is evidently a threat to our security. Can the Minister assure us that she is taking this threat seriously? And can the Honourable Lady explain how using wind turbines made by Mingyang reduces our reliance on foreign states? Mr. Speaker, just last week, I, along with many MPs in her own party, were briefed by the Royal Navy on the vulnerability of our subsea communications and energy infrastructure. We have also seen a pervasive rise in sabotage attacks on subsea cables in the Baltic, affecting our Scandinavian allies. If Chinese-manufactured turbines are installed, security experts have warned that sensors could spy on British seas, defence submarine programmes and indeed the layout of our energy infrastructure. We would be reliant on Chinese equipment and software, Chinese suppliers for updates and maintenance, handing Beijing significant opportunity for interference. In the current international climate, it is unthinkable to disregard the security implications of this decision. So can I ask the Minister, can she confirm that they have scrapped the Giga scheme that we launched to build British supply chains in energy technologies? What discussions has she had with the Ministry of Defence around their concerns as to the ability to ensure security of our energy system? What safeguards will be in place to prevent Chinese maintenance ships accessing these turbines for repairs? What guarantees has she had, if any, from our defence and security agencies that this investment will pose no threat to our national security? And if such assurances are not forthcoming, will she revisit this decision and put a halt to the madness of allowing the People's Republic of China to have such a significant stake in our energy system?
I think my starting point when the Shadow Minister, it's me, I'm the Minister now, when he said about revisiting this decision, and no decision's been made at the moment, we're undergoing rigorous processes to look at the role of China in our supply chain, in investment in critical infrastructure in this country. And I can't provide a running commentary on individual cases. Who'll know, having been in my position, why that is so important that we don't do that. But as I've made clear already, we are taking into account the national security considerations as well as our need for investment in the supply chain. I would say that in terms of the legacy that we were left by the previous minister, is that he was perfectly happy to leave our energy system exposed with the British people paying the price. And the retreat, the under new management line that he was parroting earlier this week, would leave us even more exposed to those petrostates, to the dictators. We are getting on with our clean power mission to end energy security, and I'll take no lessons from him on energy security, given their record.
Polly Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to hear the Minister point out that we are left with a legacy of an absolutely vacant industrial strategy when it comes to green investment over the past 14 years. And I urge her to explain further how we might be able to make sure that we are developing the skills and competencies in this country to make sure that we have good, strong, ethical supply chains.
Thank my honourable friend for that question. One of the things we have launched is the Clean Industry Bonus, which will be absolutely crucial in terms of protecting our supply chain. We're investing through GB Energy and through the National Wealth Fund. As I mentioned, lithium in Cornwall is just one example. And through the Global Clean Power Alliance, which we launched at the end of last year, we'll be bringing together our counterparts from other countries, including an IEA conference in April, to look at a supply chain mission so we can deal with these issues, because they're not just issues that affect us in this country. As other countries seek to decarbonise, seek to increase the role of renewables, there are capacity issues across that supply chain, and that's something that we all need to deal with, cooperating together.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Pippa Haley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend for bringing this
urgent question, which is so important. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as the Minister has rightly said, energy security has been a key term in this chamber. There are two ways of looking at energy security. First of all, which is to generate our own renewable energy to avoid volatility, price volatility, exposure to authoritarian regimes, ensure we've got the jobs here at home for design and construction. Secondly, it's about our national security issues around our energy infrastructure. That's also a term of energy security. A former MI6 chief has warned of the vulnerabilities, either deliberate or inadvertent, posed by foreign-controlled software embedded in our energy infrastructure. Given these serious concerns, can the Minister guarantee that any further investment in Scotland will ensure that this increases both the energy and national security future?
Thank you. As I've said, there are robust processes, and we are going through these processes to try to make absolutely sure that that our national security is not compromised by investment from overseas, and that is something we'll continue to do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Grangemouth Refinery is a key piece of vital infrastructure for Scotland, and its economic contribution to the Scottish economy every year is over £400 million. The Grangemouth Refinery is also a joint venture between PetroChina, owned by the Chinese state, and INEOS, a multinational conglomerate. Together they are Petro-INEOS. The refinery is due to close, with thousands of jobs being lost, an unjust transition, and Scotland having to rely on importing oil, all at a time of great global volatility. Why is the government allowing a foreign government and private capital dictate Scotland's industrial capacity, its ability to produce oil, and overall our national security?
Well, we're not allowing anyone to dictate to us, and I know that the Honourable Member has been deep in conversation with the Minister for Energy for some time over the future of Grangemouth. But as I reiterated, we absolutely need to attract the investment that we need to meet our clean power mission, to secure our future energy security, and in the long run bring down bills for the British people. We need to balance national security concerns as in tandem with that, and neither one of them takes priority. We need to tackle those challenges together, and that's what we'll do.
Ian Duncan-Smith. Sir.
Mr. Speaker, whatever the question is about energy, China is not the answer. It's on two fronts. We know that the MOD and the Department of Energy Security has raised objections about the Treasury's push to bring Minyang Smart Energy into the circuit on this one, to bid for this. The second thing is that China is determined to use slave labour in their products. We are, under this government, investing in solar arrays which have a huge amount of slave labour in them producing polysilicon. Does the government not recognise that their tilt towards China to get them to invest in this runs the real risk of utter dependency on China and, of course, serious threats to our security, highlighted endlessly by the security services? Will they now stop?
I recognise that the Right Honourable Member has long-standing concerns about the role of China and its investment in our economy, and he's been a great champion of raising concerns about forced labour. He's right to raise those concerns. We have set up the Solar Task Force, I'm sure he's aware, to look at the issue of whether there's forced labour in our solar supply chains. We also, as I said, with the Global Clean Power Alliance, there will be a supply chain mission as part of that's launched. And as I said, it's not something that one country can tackle by itself. We all need to be alert to the risks of slave labour. I know that there was an amendment passed in the House of Lords last night that means the issue's coming back to the Chamber soon. I look forward to the discussion then.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that developing our economic and trading relationships with other nations is one lever of many that this government is using to drive growth and investment alongside planning reforms, public investment and a proper industrial strategy for the people of the UK, but also for the people in my city, and at the same time ensuring that we work across departments to always have our nation's security at its core?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and we're doing this through a number of levers. We have the growth mission, we have the clean power mission, working hand in hand to make sure that energy security and the decarbonisation of our power system contributes to growth in this country, and that means it contributes to job creation in this country, as well as, in some cases, overseas investment. We have the We've set up Great British Energy, we have the National Wealth Fund, we have the Clean Industry Bonus. All of those will help us achieve those objectives.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Have ministers or officials in the Ministry of Defence, the Home Office or the Security Services raised any concerns with her department over the possibility of offshore structures in British waters being used for Chinese intelligence gathering technology? And if there are sensitive matters which cannot be discussed in this House, will she commit to holding a private briefing for members of Parliament on the security implications of energy infrastructure from China?
Minister.
Okay. I don't think I can comment on the extent of conversations other than to reassure the honourable member that, of course, these conversations are taking place. Of course, there are robust processes that we are going through, and there'll be ongoing conversations. Again, because it's not my specific role, I wouldn't be able to say whether that is information that can be shared. I don't think it can be shared on a day-to-day basis, but perhaps if there's a briefing that we could arrange with members to give them some reassurance as to the general approach, I'll investigate whether we can do that.
Melanie Arm.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say I'm surprised at the benches opposite. They seem to have forgotten when they were pushing on this country the golden era of the relationship between the UK and China. And some of this is the legacy that remains from their time in government. And so I think that they should just be careful about how they're approaching this conversation. And I would just like to take the opportunity to point out to the Minister the role that Grimsby plays in servicing and supporting operations of offshore wind, not only around UK waters but also as far as Taiwan. Those skills and those competencies and capabilities do exist here in the country, so I'd like to ask the Minister what additional support will be given to expand those capabilities and support for those skills in this country.
Minister.
My honourable friend has been a real champion for Grimsby. I'm very glad to see her returned at the recent election so she can carry on championing all the potential that Grimsby has to offer, not least in terms of the wind sector. We think it's really important that we link up the skills and the capacity. That's one of the obstacles. We talk very often about how grid capacity and how planning issues can hold up the rollout of clean power, but actually we know that we've got to have the skills base as well, and we're working with the Department of Education very much on that, how we can train the workforce and develop through things like the Growth and Skills Levy capacity within the existing workforce as well to work on these exciting new projects.
Sir Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister speaks about being reliant on petrochemical states and dictatorships who supplied the fuel needed for our energy system. And yet the vast majority of the processed materials that are needed, whether we construct them here or not, come from China. We recognise that some of these countries were dictators, but can the Minister at the dispatch box now confirm to this House that a country that uses slave labour, a country that has carried out the most horrendous crimes against the Uyghur population, a country that has sanctioned our own parliamentarians, is indeed as much as a dictatorship as the countries that she says we no longer want to be reliant on?
Well, if we followed the approach being suggested by the opposition front bench now, we would be very firmly back in the hands of the petrostates and the dictators. And we've seen... But in terms of relationship with China, as I've said, we will cooperate where we can, we will compete where we need to, and we will absolutely challenge if we must. And we've been clear that no company in the UK should have forced labour in the supply chain. This is why we've set up the Solar Task Force. This is why we're going through the robust processes ahead of the decision that we're talking about here today. And I will take no lessons from the honourable member, because we've had 14 years of being exposed to volatile energy markets, and we are trying to recreate our energy security through this investment.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would the Minister agree that after a real neglect of our energy infrastructure for the last 14 years, setting up GB Energy to help UK ownership of energy production in the future can only be a good thing, and our investment in critical minerals in Cornwall particularly, and the supply chain for floating offshore wind, will be crucial to secure our national security?
Minister.
On the one hand, the honourable members raise concerns about critical minerals being imported from abroad. And then when my honourable friend from Cornwall, who again is a real champion for her area, when she praises the investment that we have put into lithium extraction in Cornwall, they start jeering. And through GB Energy, through the National Wealth Fund, we will continue to do that investment.
Claire Young.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To have true energy security, we need homegrown capability at all stages of the development of renewable energy infrastructure, from the earliest research to maintenance and decommissioning. So can the Minister tell me what steps she is taking to ensure that we have that homegrown full life cycle capability?
Minister.
I think from the honourable member's question, she may be talking about community energy. I'm not quite clear, but no. In that case, I'm saying, but it is really important, I think, that any investment is place-based, and we need to look at developing the capability right from skills and what the capacity of the local authorities are, which is where things like community energy comes in, but then also making sure that the finance goes where the investment is needed. And if I haven't understood the honourable member's question, I'd be happy to take it up with her afterwards.
Tom Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Minister's engagement on this topic. To have meaningful and serious discussions with other major economies is absolutely vital for our success. Does the Minister agree with me that these discussions are key not only to securing our economic aims, but also tackling the climate and nature crisis and also our wider international objectives?
Minister.
Yeah, that international cooperation is absolutely crucial, and that does mean talking to countries with whom we share a great deal in common and have signed up the same objectives, but it also means talking to other countries to try to bring them with us too. And that is why we're hosting the IEA Summit in April in London. That is why we've set up the Global Clean Power Alliance, and that is why the Prime Minister went to the climate change talks in COP in Baku last autumn and showed international leadership, which is something that has been very much lacking from the UK government in previous years.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clearly, the national security concerns are being expressed across the House. Will the Minister give an undertaking that the construction, maintenance and indeed access to software will be carried out by British workers on British ships and not subcontracted to foreign powers?
Minister.
As I've said, I can't comment on individual cases, but there are processes to make sure that our national security is protected as we look ahead.
Tony Vaughan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister's reassurance about the Government's rigorous scrutiny of energy projects involving Chinese technologies, and I understand the argument that at the current stage of our transition to net zero, we may need to look further afield to meet our domestic energy needs. But will the Minister agree with me that the long-term plan ought to be to reduce reliance on Chinese technology in the UK energy sector and rather to use British-made green technologies where there can be no concerns around national security or about ethical supply chains?
Minister.
Yeah, I agree absolutely, and that's why we are doing all we can to increase capacity through things like the Clean Industry Bonus, through investment from the National Wealth Fund, through the role of GB Energy and all the other measures that we'll be taking our industrial strategy to try to ensure that we keep the jobs in the UK and we create new jobs in the UK too.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Ministers all over the place on this. In her opening remarks, she said that the United Kingdom has a world-leading renewable energy industry. Well, if we did, we wouldn't be having this discussion about foreign imported infrastructure. So will she commit to understand, notwithstanding the total failure of the Tories over 14 years to invest in the industrial base of renewable energy manufacturing across the United Kingdom, what is her strategy and her government strategy to get right in front of this, not just in terms of manufacturing, but also in terms of resource supply, enterprise resource planning, intellectual property? What is the big shift that this government has got planned? Because I just hear jibber-jabber.
That's not very polite of the honourable member, but as I've said, we are doing all we can to attract investment into the UK so that we can be as reliant as possible on our own resources, and that means our own supply chain, that means attracting investment and so on, but we are doing it through the National Wealth Fund, we're doing it through GB Energy, and there was much discussion, I don't know to what extent the honourable member took part in the debate around the GB Energy, the Great British Energy Bill, but we are absolutely doing that. And on an international level, as I said, this has to be solved on an international level. We're doing a lot of work with our colleagues in terms of making the North Sea the green power plant of Europe through NSEC, the North Seas Energy Cooperation Council, and we've set up the Global Clean Power Alliance. And we cannot do this alone. We cannot do it acting alone. I know that the SNP prefers that approach, but we're absolutely doing it in cooperation, but we're doing it in the best interest of the British economy as well.
Alex Ballinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister confirm that her department's work is entirely consistent with the government's approach to China, cooperate where we can, compete where we need to, and challenge where we must?
Minister.
I mean, that is exactly our approach, and that is the right approach. I don't know whether the opposition front bench would advocate not cooperating with China where we can, but they're an incredibly important player on the world stage, and we gain nothing from completely turning our backs on them and not engaging in that dialogue.
Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Following Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, we saw how Russia responded in the global tariffs and sanctions market by trying to use its dominance in the nuclear fuel market to put pressure on the allies of Ukraine. And therefore, we've seen that vulnerability in our energy supply chain when our enemies and allies of those enemies want to use it against us. The former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearland, has said that the government's target to decarbonise the grid hands power to Beijing. And when we talk about having reliance on dictator states, we have enough oil and gas in the UK to do that without any reliance. So why don't we just get drilling and get our own oil and our own gas out of the ground? So has the government, given I suspect in their mad dash to decarbonise the grid are not going to do that, has the government undertaken a risk assessment of the strategic vulnerability to our national security of our increasing reliance on Chinese rare earth minerals and battery production?
Minister.
I think I have already made very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are ongoing conversations about that, and we take national security incredibly seriously when we look at investment decisions. In terms of what he had to say about producing more oil and gas here for our own use, I think he needs a lesson in how the energy markets actually work. There's no guarantee that it would be used here.
Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The issue with this is the rush that the Labour government have to decarbonise by 2030. Because of that rush, we do not have the capabilities in this country at the moment to fulfil all the requirements that are needed to deliver those projects. Until the point where we will always be reliant on overseas powers, overseas people like the Chinese government, like Chinese manufacturers, to deliver what we need in order to decarbonise. Is this government prepared and happy to sacrifice our national security and our energy security in order to reach that 2030 target?
Minister.
That sounds very much like the honourable member has made the case for an industrial strategy that ensures that we can match demand with supply, and that's an approach that was particularly missing from the last government.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Almost on a weekly basis, we are lectured by the net zero obsessed Secretary of State that the race for renewables is necessary in order to give us a secure future supply of energy in this country. And yet, the renewable industry is increasingly dependent upon Chinese technology and rare earth metals, which the Chinese control 70% of. So we're placing our future energy supply in the hands of a dictatorship which has proved itself in other states to be willing to use the infrastructure to blackmail the countries in which it's based. Is this not a case that we should be looking at the supply of fossil fuels that we have in this country, decades of gas and oil which could be used? We would secure this, we'd be sure that we could use it and we wouldn't be interfered by others in using it.
Minister.
We absolutely believe that the best route to energy security is by our Clean Power by 2030 mission and further investment in renewables, and that remains our stance.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for her answers to the questions? The Minister will be aware that the costly environmental obligations which government imposes on home manufactured goods are not adhered to by many other nations, which prevents our UK manufacturers from being able to compete on many occasions. Combined with human rights breaches routinely carried out by the Chinese business on Uyghurs, on Falun Gong, on Christians and many other ethnic minorities. Does the Minister not agree that these considerations must be equally weighted with cost, and it will seem that human rights and Chinese production will never add up, and this must inform any contract offered by this nation of ours? Thank you.
Minister.
I think that the honourable member has frequently raised, well, he's frequently raised almost every issue you can think of in this chamber, but I know that I've taken part in very many debates about human rights in countries of concern overseas over the years. He's absolutely right to flag those concerns. As I said, we have the Solar Task Force, we have the Supply Chain Mission with the Global Clean Power Alliance. We are very much alert to this. We do not want to see forced labour or any form of modern slavery in our supply chains, and that is something that we're absolutely determined to take action on.
That concludes the urgent question. We now come to the statement, and I'll allow a few moments for the front benches to swap over and members to come in. Statement, Minister Dan Jarvis.
Thank you. With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will make a statement on the publication of the Prevent Learning Review into the perpetrator of the attack that tragically killed Sir David Amess on the 15th of October 2021. Sir David Amess was a beloved member of this House, a hugely respected parliamentarian. His popularity extended right across the political divide. To win and keep the respect of those outside one's own party is, as we all know, a rare accomplishment. Over nearly 40 years of service in this place, Sir David fought every day for his constituents. He advanced numerous causes with compassion, persistence and skill, and members on all sides of the House knew him as a warm, respectful and always fair parliamentarian. His legacy lives on, not least in Southend, which now has the city status he campaigned so determinedly for. He will never be forgotten, and as the motto on Sir David's memorial shield behind me states, his light remains. Now, whilst this House has lost a hugely valued member on that terrible day, Sir David's wife and children lost a loving husband and a devoted father. They are in our thoughts and prayers today and always. Together with the Home Secretary, who spoke with Sir David's family recently, I recognise the courage and persistence they have shown in seeking the answers that they deserve. As the House will know, it was a heinous act of violence on the 15th of October 2021 that took Sir David away from those who knew and loved him. The killer, Ali Harbi Ali, and I won't say his name again, was convicted of murder in April 2022 and received a whole life sentence. The judge said that this was a murder that struck at the heart of our democracy, and he had no doubt whatsoever that the nature of this case meant that the perpetrator must be kept in prison for the rest of his life. The perpetrator had previously been referred to the Prevent programme and subsequently to the Specialist Channel programme between 2014 and 2016, between 5 and 7 years before the attack took place. Immediately after the attack, a Prevent Learning Review was jointly commissioned by the Home Office and Counter-Terrorism Policing to examine what happened in the case and see whether lessons needed to be rapidly learned. It was completed in February 2022. Now, last week, I made a statement to the House on the Government's publication of the Prevent Learning Review concerning the perpetrator of the abhorrent attack in Southport. Today, we're taking a further step to enable public scrutiny of Prevent, and in recognition of the seriousness of the terrible attack on Sir David, by publishing the Prevent Learning Review conducted in this case too. The perpetrator of the attack on Sir David became known to Prevent in October 2014, when he was referred by his school after teachers identified a change in his behaviour. The case was adopted by the Channel Multi-Agency Early Intervention Programme in November of 2014. An intervention provider who specialised in tackling Islamist extremism was assigned to work with him. The perpetrator was exited from Channel in April 2015 after his terrorism risk was assessed as low. A 12-month post-exit police review in 2016 also found no terrorism concerns, and the case was closed to Prevent at that point. There were no further Prevent referrals in the 5 years between the case being closed and the attack. The Prevent Learning Review examined how Prevent dealt with the perpetrator's risk and how far the improvements made to Prevent since he was referred 7 years prior would have impacted upon his management. The review considered both the handling of the case at the time and also the changes that had been made to Prevent since the referral in 2014. It examined how far those changes addressed any problems identified and then made a series of recommendations. The reviewer found that from the material reviewed, the assessment in terms of the perpetrator's vulnerabilities was problematic, and this ultimately led to questionable decision-making and suboptimal handling of the case during the time he was engaged with Prevent and Channel. It identified that the vulnerability assessment framework was not followed, with the perpetrator's symptoms being prioritised over addressing the underlying causes of his vulnerabilities. The reviewer ultimately found that while Prevent policy and guidance at the time was mostly followed, the case was exited from Prevent too quickly. The reviewer identified 6 issues, namely that the support given did not tackle all of the vulnerabilities identified, record keeping was problematic, and the rationale for certain decisions was not explicit. Responsibilities between police and the local authority were blurred. The tool used for identifying an individual's vulnerability to radicalisation was outdated. The school that made the referral to Prevent should have been involved in discussions to help determine risk and appropriate support, and the tasking of the intervention provider was problematic, with a miscommunication leading to only 1 session being provided instead of 2. The reviewer then examined how far changes in the Prevent programme since 2016 had addressed these issues. The reviewer recognised the significant changes that had been made to Prevent since the perpetrator was managed, in particular the introduction of the statutory Prevent and Channel duties under the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act of 2015. The reviewer concluded that over the intervening period there have been considerable changes to policy and guidance for both the police and the wider Prevent arena, including Channel. Whilst a number of the issues in the perpetrator's case would most likely not be repeated today, there were still a number of areas which could be considered as requiring further work in order to mitigate against future failures. The reviewer made 4 recommendations for actions to further strengthen Prevent. These were to improve the referral process, strengthen the initial intelligence assessment process, update the tool used to identify vulnerability to being drawn into terrorism, and to not reduce data retention periods. Since the report, the Home Office and Counter-Terrorism Policing have fully implemented all 4 recommendations. First, a single national referral form was launched to encourage a consistent approach to referrals, building this into new training packages and mandating its use via statutory guidance. Second, training has been delivered to police staff to strengthen the initial intelligence check stage, ensuring their understanding of Prevent is robust. Third, a new Prevent assessment framework was rolled out in September of 2024. This replaces the tools previously used to assess all referrals and cases in the Prevent system. And fourth, data retention periods were fully reviewed in 2023, and a joint decision was taken by the Home Office and Counter-Terrorism Policing to maintain retention review periods at 6 years or 6 years after the 12-month review for Channel cases. In addition to the publication of the Prevent Learning Review, we recognise the significant concerns that remain over the way in which Prevent dealt with the perpetrator, as well as the need to ensure that the recommendations it suggested for improving the scheme have been properly implemented. Last week, I set out to the House a series of new reforms instituted by the government to strengthen the Prevent programme, recognising the vital work done by officers across the country to keep people safe. That included the creation of a new independent Prevent Commissioner. And I can today inform the House that the Home Secretary has asked the Prevent Commissioner to review the Prevent programme's interactions with the perpetrator in this case and ensure the implementation of all relevant recommendations. We will ensure that the Amis family have the support they need to engage with the Prevent Commissioner in this work so that they can have confidence that it will get to the truth about any failings in the scheme. Madam Deputy Speaker, two further important issues have been raised which are relevant to this case: local policing and members' security. On local policing, concerns have been raised by the Amis family about the way in which Essex Police handled this case. A complaint has been made and referred back to the local force by the IOPC for consideration. That process must be allowed to follow its course. However, I can inform the House that the Home Secretary has written to the Chief Constable and the Police and Crime Commissioner of Essex Police, asking them to set out how the investigation will be conducted and to be kept updated as the investigation progresses. Secondly, on members' security, this is something that the Home Secretary and I care deeply about, and I know that it is a matter to which Mr. Speaker attaches the utmost importance, as will all members right across this House. A review of security measures for MPs commissioned under the previous government has concluded, and all the recommendations have been implemented. We must ensure that the learnings from this case have been properly implemented, and I want to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Speaker for his continued leadership on these matters. The Speaker's Conference is specifically considering what reforms are necessary to further improve MPs' security and safety. This is another important step. And the Leader of the House, the Home Secretary and myself look forward to working closely with the Speaker and with all members to ensure that the facts of the appalling murder of Sir David are properly considered as part of the Speaker's Conference work, and that the Parliamentary Security Department implements the recommendations it made following the review it conducted into the aftermath of Sir David's death. I'm also grateful to previous Home Secretaries and Security Ministers for their efforts in this area. Our democracy is precious, and this government will defend it against any and all threats, not least through the Defending Democracy Task Force, where we are mounting a whole-of-government response to combat these threats, including ensuring that elected representatives can perform their duties safely and without fear. Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, I want to pay tribute once more to Sir David. He was a giant of this House, and we miss him dearly. In all that he did, Sir David epitomised public service at its best. It is beyond a tragedy that we can no longer seek his advice or rely on his wisdom. We can, though, follow his example and devote ourselves every day to the task of building a better and safer Britain. That is our shared challenge, Madam Deputy Speaker, and under this government, nothing will matter more. I commend this statement to the House.
I call Chris Philp, Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And let me start by thanking